In March of 1971, as tension between East and West Pakistan reached a breaking point, a man stood before a sea of desperate faces and uttered words that would change the fate of millions. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the father of the Bengali nation, called on his people to prepare for independence. His speech was calm, almost restrained, yet it sparked one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century. Within months, nearly 3 million Bangladeshis were dead, entire cities were burned to ashes, and the young nation that emerged from the ruins was left among the poorest on earth. The timing could not have been worse. Just 4 months before independence, the deadliest tropical cyclone in recorded history had drowned 500,000 people and flooded a fifth of the country. When World Bank officials later surveyed the aftermath, they said some towns looked like the morning after a nuclear attack. Bangladesh in 1972 was a nation of shattered roads, broken bridges, and burned-out factories. Life expectancy barely reached 26 years. A third of all children died before the age of 5, and the average person survived on less than 33 cents a day. To most of the world, this was a hopeless place, the international basket case that could never stand on its own feet. Yet half a century later, the same nation that began with famine and rubble now boasts one of the fastest-growing economies in Asia. Life expectancy has more than doubled, poverty has fallen from 80% to below 20%, and child mortality has plunged by over 90%. Bangladesh's GDP per capita, once half of Pakistan's, is now nearly 50% higher. Somehow, the world's poorest country is quietly becoming South Asia's richest success story. When Sheikh Mujibur Rahman returned home from imprisonment in early 1972, the task before him was almost impossible: rebuild a country from nothing. His government nationalized over 700 industries, believing state control would restore order and equality, but the experiment failed. Lacking experienced managers and resources, factories ground to a halt, production collapsed, and agriculture, the nation's lifeline, fell to historic lows. In 1974, a devastating flood wiped out crops, inflation soared to 400%, and 1.5 million people starved to death. Disillusioned and desperate to maintain control, Mujibur transformed the young democracy into a one-party socialist state. Only months later, he and most of his family were assassinated in a violent coup. What followed were years of military rule and political chaos. But within the turmoil, new leaders began to reshape Bangladesh's destiny. General Ziaur Rahman, known simply as Zia, took power in the late 1970s and began to dismantle the failed socialist system. He reopened markets, lifted restrictions on foreign investment, and courted international aid. Western donors, seeing reform, poured in money and expertise. Zia's government introduced high-yield rice varieties, fertilizers, and irrigation systems that transformed agriculture. Farmers could now grow more food on less land and even plant through the winter. Within a generation, Bangladesh went from famine to food security, but Zia's reforms did not last long. His rule ended in another coup, and soon General Hussein Mohammad Ershad seized power. Like his predecessors, Ershad ruled with an iron fist, but unlike them, he allowed something revolutionary to flourish: the rise of non-governmental organizations. Too weak to provide basic services himself, he gave NGOs extraordinary freedom to operate across the country. And that decision changed everything. Bangladesh became a global laboratory for fighting poverty. Professor Muhammad Yunus founded Grameen Bank, pioneering the idea of microcredit, giving small, collateral-free loans to poor villagers, especially women, to start businesses. The model was simple yet transformative. Borrowers formed small groups, supported one another, and repaid nearly every loan. Within years, millions gained access to credit for the first time, lifting countless families out of extreme poverty. Yunus would later receive the Nobel Peace Prize for his work, but his true legacy lives in the communities that rose from destitution to independence. Around the same time, another homegrown organization, BRAC, founded by Faisal Hassan Abed, expanded even faster. Originally building homes for war refugees, BRAC began tackling health crises, education, and gender inequality. Its campaign teaching mothers to prepare oral rehydration solutions cut diarrhea-related child deaths by 90%. Its microfinance programs empowered women to earn their own income, invest in education, and reshape the future of their families. By the end of the 1980s, Bangladesh's rural landscape was filled with schools, clinics, and cooperatives, not built by the government, but by the people themselves, guided by NGOs. Then in 1990, after years of unrest, mass protests toppled Ershad's regime. Democracy returned under a caretaker government, and in 1991 Khaleda Zia, the widow of General Zia, became prime minister. Her administration deepened the economic reforms, opening the country further to global trade. 7 new export processing zones were built to attract investors, and labor laws were eased to encourage manufacturing. But Bangladesh had no oil, no minerals, and an unskilled workforce. What could it sell to the world? The answer was simple: clothing. In the 1970s, global trade quotas had limited garment exports from countries like South Korea and Taiwan, pushing companies to search for new production bases. Bangladesh, with its low wages and trade privileges as a least developed country, became the perfect alternative. A South Korean company, Daewoo, partnered with a small local firm to train Bangladeshi workers in modern garment manufacturing. The trainees later started their own factories, and soon a quiet revolution began. By the early 2000s, the ready-made garment industry was employing millions, mostly women, and exporting billions of dollars worth of clothing to Europe and North America. What began as a desperate attempt to create jobs became the backbone of the nation's economy. By 2021, garment exports exceeded $34 billion, accounting for more than 80% of all exports and making Bangladesh the second largest garment producer in the world after China. The influx of money transformed society. Families sent their daughters to work in factories, income in rural areas surged, and women gained unprecedented independence. At the same time, millions of Bangladeshi workers left to work in the Gulf states, sending home billions in remittances. Together, the garments and remittances turned chronic trade deficits into surpluses and gave the government the ability to build highways, bridges, and power plants. For the first time, Bangladesh stood on its own economic feet. And here's where it gets fascinating. The true miracle of Bangladesh is not built on oil or natural resources, but on resilience. It's a story written by ordinary people who refused to surrender. The women who stitched the world's clothes by hand. The farmers who learned to harvest more from barren fields. The teachers, nurses, and NGO workers who rebuilt a nation brick by brick. That's the Bangladesh few outsiders ever see. And if you're still here, now is the perfect time to join the journey. Hit that subscribe button and help share stories that prove no country is too broken to rise again. Yet beneath the optimism, there are cracks forming in this extraordinary success. The economy remains dangerously dependent on one industry. Garments account for 10% of total output and over 4/5 of exports. But by 2026, Bangladesh will lose its least developed country status, and with it, the special trade advantages that kept its clothes cheap in global markets. Cheaper rivals like Cambodia and Ethiopia are already competing for the same buyers. And since Bangladesh's advantage still relies on low wages, any rise in labor costs could cause the entire system to stumble. Rapid urbanization is creating new challenges too. Over 40 million people have migrated from rural areas to crowded cities like Dhaka and Chittagong, overwhelming housing, healthcare, and infrastructure. The slums sprawl outward, and with them come inequality and pollution. Add to this the looming threat of climate change. 75% of Bangladesh lies below sea level, and storms already cause billions in annual damage. Rising seas and stronger floods could displace millions more in the decades ahead. Still, none of these dangers compares to the one embedded within the nation's politics. Since independence, Bangladesh's greatest weakness has been its institutions. Corruption permeates every level of government. Power flows through networks of loyalty and favors rather than accountability and law. Politicians reward supporters with contracts, jobs, and loans that never need repayment. The justice system, far from independent, shields the powerful and targets dissenters. Transparency is almost non-existent, and Bangladesh consistently ranks near the bottom globally for ease of doing business. This environment suffocates innovation and deters investment, leaving the private sector small and dependent on government connections. Even as the country prospers, its political system remains brittle, dominated by a rivalry between two dynasties, the families of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Ziaur Rahman. Sheikh Hasina, Mujibur's daughter and current prime minister, has ruled for most of the past decade. Under her leadership, opposition leaders have been jailed, media freedoms restricted, and fair elections undermined. Critics argue that Bangladesh is slowly returning to the one-party system its founder once envisioned. For now, growth continues, powered by the momentum of past reforms and the hard work of millions. But the question remains, how long can a nation thrive when its politics remain broken? Bangladesh's story is proof that progress can emerge even from chaos, that a people's determination can outshine the failures of their leaders. Whether that spirit can survive the challenges ahead will decide if Bangladesh's miracle becomes permanent or fades into another forgotten dream. So what do you think? Can Bangladesh overcome its own politics to become South Asia's richest nation? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this is a story still being written and your voice deserves to be part of it.